Hey everybody, Jerry Jones here with Jerry Jones Direct, the radio show podcast, and you're listening to this recorded sometime late June, early July. And with me as special guest, I have the one and only, where lightning seems to strike regularly, Perry Marshall. And if you don't know Perry Marshall, Google Perry Marshall, and you'll see a number of incredible stories about Perry, what he's accomplished. He's a widely acclaimed and highly published author, speaker, trainer. His expert level understanding and knowledge of Google and Google AdWords is untouchable. He is launched off in a 15-year journey that's culminated here recently in such an incredible outcome that as soon as Perry shared it with me, I said, I got to have you on the podcast because this is something, while totally unrelated to dentistry, is something that every dentist probably has an interest in just because of the curiosity factor. It's off the chart. So Perry, I could keep going and introducing you and adding the accolades, but man, I'm proud to call you a friend, and I'm really excited to have you on this podcast radio show. So welcome, sir.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here, and dentists will totally get this because dentists work with human bodies and mouths and bacteria and infections, and dentists are also essentially engineers, and I'm an engineer. So like dentists and engineers, they can understand each other just fine. And so yeah, like this is a story of an engineer going down a really crazy rabbit hole. You asked me if there's a formula in a sort of a way there is, and yeah, I think this is going to be a lot of fun for people to listen to. This is a crazy, crazy story.
Good. Well, Perry, I'll do a little backstory on how we know each other. So we're both part of that world of that people know as Dan Kennedy, and that's where you and I met. And we've ran into each other over the years and had conversations and had some really deep, as you tend to do. You attract these these highly intelligent. I don't know where I fit into this, but you attract these really highly intelligent people, and you have these deep philosophical conversations with them that when you listen to them, they're just like, wow, like how does this stuff even materialize? How do these thoughts materialize? I'm constantly amazed. I think of conversations you've had with John Carlton. I mean, that one comes to mind. There's just so many, but the one with John and those that you've had with John are just, to me, those are really precious and dear. I don't know John personally. I know of him. I've met him, but I mean, just really good stuff. So, so Perry, your background, you went to University of Nebraska. You're an engineer, and you have this wild story of getting out of quote unquote the Dilbert cube and getting into business for yourself. So you left the corporate world, which I think that story alone is funny. The fax broadcast story is just hilarious. Fired. Was that like an April Fool's joke or something like that?
Well, just about. Me and my friend Tony, we worked at W.W. Granger, big wholesale company. And I was a grunt working in the warehouse, and so is he. And our boss was gone that day, and we decided to play a prank on the Omaha branch. We were in Lincoln, and 50
this
miles.
Is what people do in middle America for fun, you guys.
Yeah. So I wrote this fax, and it said, "Dear branch managers," it was from the CEO of the company, using his name and office number and everything. And it said, we regret to inform you that Granger stock has suddenly and inexplicably plummeted from $63 a share to $17 a share, and we will be closing all branches effective Friday. We wish to thank you for your many years of hard work and dedication, and we will make every effort to meet payroll for the current week. And we put it in the fax button and pressed send, and then we waited for Omaha to call us up and say, ha ha ha, very funny guys. And they never called. And we started getting nervous after about 45 minutes, and Tony calls them up, and the guy goes, "Oh, that was you? Oh, well, Brenda pulled that off the fax machine and went into hysterics, and she started calling her family members and crying, and I've worked here for 12 years, and we didn't know what to think, and so we faxed it to Sioux City." And then they didn't know what to think, so they faxed it to Fort Smith, Arkansas. And guess what? That was my first experience in electronic viral marketing in 1990, and copywriting for that matter. That was my debut as a copywriter, which I didn't even know what the word copywriting even meant for another 10 years, but there you go. So I got fired from that job. And as you might imagine, the Granger management wasn't real. I found out it got all the way to the CEO who had allegedly sent it. They were not, my boss told me every level of management that it went up, they got frownier and frownier about this fax. He's like, Perry, a multi-billion-dollar corporations, they do not joke about money. You're just going to have to understand this in, your future career, and don't let the door hit you as you walk out. So, yeah, so to make a really long story short, that was the very beginning of me figuring out that I am a serious misfit. And I'm not going to fit, okay, unless I create my own thing. So here we are. And look, part of the reason that I am an entrepreneur is I need the flexibility to go do interesting things and explore rabbit holes and do what I think is important. It would kill me if I woke up every morning and my priority is what somebody hands me on a piece of paper. And so that's given me the latitude to do the Evolution 2.0 project, which if you'd asked me 20 years ago, so do you think you would become some expert on evolutionary processes? I'd be like, why in the world would I ever be interested in that? But that's what happened. So.
Well, you brought it up, Evolution 2.0. This project that you're working on is fascinating, and that's really where I want this to go, because this is where dentists are going to go, I get it. So we're talking about evolution, but we're talking about where's the scientific proof, where's the root of it all start, and so maybe you could expand on that concept and get us to present day. Go back 15 years and now get us to present day, where you recently returned. And I'm gonna throw this out, dangle the carrot, so we have our listeners stick with us, all the way to one of the preeminent scientific group in the world. I mean, literally the world, which is the Royal Society. So let's hear that story.
So let me just preface by saying, when I went down this rabbit hole, I decided to reframe the whole thing as an engineering problem rather than a religious food fight. Okay. And so, because you bring up evolution, why don't we, at the same time, why don't we bring up abortion, gay rights, gun control, and immigration? Why don't we just get them all out on the table? So, it tends to be a pretty inflammatory topic, and I think you'll find the way that I approach it is not so much that way. So here's what happened. So I'm a pastor's kid, and so is my brother, as you might suspect. And my brother went to seminary and got a master's degree in theology, and then he moved to China and he started doing missionary work. And I'm here in the States, and I'm running my business, and I'm doing different things. And about 2 years into Brian living in China, his whole belief system starts unraveling. And I would say that for the first time in his life, he was actually thinking for himself. And he wasn't just thinking the thoughts that all the authorities told him to think. And he's in a different country, and nobody can run his life or tell him what to do. And this whole perfectly manicured belief system that has been coiffed and shaped by all of these people is unraveling. And we got all these emails going back and forth, and we're trying to figure this out. And most of these are theological, historical kind of things that come up in religious questions. But anyway, it's we'll work through this. And I go to visit him in China in 2004, and I get there, and it's suddenly obvious he's bailed. He doesn't believe in God anymore. He's not an atheist, but he's certainly not a Christian, and he's thrown the whole thing out the window. And in fact, he's actually changed his views on a whole bunch of things. And it was like this very jarring kind of thing, because we come from this super religious, tight-knit family, and it's like, Thanksgiving dinner might be really this year. And he was kind of dragging me with him, because, it's one thing to shoot the ball about religious questions with typical people, but you have not done it until you've done it with a guy with a master's degree in theology who knows Greek and Hebrew and all this kind of stuff. And so I was feeling very unsettled about all of this, including like, well, I don't know, if he keeps asking me enough questions, I might end up being like him, and and then how's that going to turn out? And so it was extremely unsettling. And so we got into this argument in China, and I go, Brian, look at the hand at the end of your arm. This is where we're talking Dennis here. Look at the hand at the end of your arm. This is a nice piece of engineering, Brian. And I'm an engineer. Like, you don't think this is an accumulation of random accidents, do you? He's like, hold on. And he just comes right back at me with this whole Darwinian explanation. You don't need any designer. You don't need God. All you need is millions of years and DNA mutations, and natural selection is going to sort the good ones from the bad ones. It's going to keep getting better and better and better. You don't need any designer. And I listened to that, and I thought, okay. As an engineer, I've never seen anything like that actually work that way. But I'm not a biologist, and those guys might know something I don't know. So how about, this arguing with Brian is not making for a very fun trip to China to begin with. How about I just set all that stuff aside, and when I get home, and remember, Brian had already kind of shaken me up on a number of levels already. How about I go home and I let science make this decision for me? And the question is the hand at the end of my arm here because the world and the universe is a purposeful place and it's been made that way somehow? Or is it billiard balls banging around the universe and it's all meaningless and random accidents get you hands, and I just thought there was an engineering? I don't know, but I will find out, because engineering should work anywhere, right? Like, maybe the biologists know something that us engineers don't know. And maybe if we figure out what it is, maybe we're going to write better software or something. So I plunged down the rabbit hole. And being the obsessive entrepreneur, OCD kind of person that most entrepreneurs are, and I'm buying a lot of books, and I'm reading, and I'm listening to stuff, and I'm the left and the right and everything in between. And pretty soon, actually, it took me about 2 weeks to figure out, dude, you're not going to get anywhere with the surface level literature like the stuff you buy in the bookstore. You're going to have to go into the real scientific literature. So pretty soon I'm reading scientific papers. And so I could not have imagined how fascinating this was going to be, because at this point I'm just scared to death, right? Like, well, I don't know, maybe my wife's going to go to church without me, and I'm going to be like, the husband that bailed on all that, right? And that might have some interesting relationship dynamics. And how about the kids? Is dad going to talk to the kids about what dad thinks, or is he just going to keep his mouth shut? All these kind of questions, right?
So how many times in this initial 6 months to a year, how many times did you change your mind? How many times did you flip-flop going back and forth?
Well, what would happen is I would read, and I read generously from both sides, and like all these books. I mean, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 I bet I've got 7, 8, or 10 of these bookshelves are on origins related questions, and most of them are biology. And what I would find is I would find both sides to be very compelling. I would go back and forth and back and forth. And actually, what started to solidify was an impression that they were both right about seemingly contradictory things, and a certainty that they were both wrong about a lot of stuff too. And
that's like not helpful. It's like, okay, I mean, right? You're still conflicted, right? You don't have very definitive, even close to a definitive answer on either side.
Well, so here's the first definitive thing I found, and it was very comforting actually. So for a while I was just like, I don't even know where the bottom of the swimming pool is. Like, I don't know anything for sure. This is just like a big squishy question with a million tentacles, and I don't even know what to pull on. But one day I was reading about how does DNA work and how does genetic code work and stuff. And all of a sudden I go, whoa, wait a minute. I've seen this before. I know what this is. I can deal with this. Oh, whoa. Now here's what it was. In 2002, I wrote a book, now in its 3rd edition, called Industrial Ethernet, aka Insomnia Cure for Just About Anybody. But in a former career, I was in factory automation and industry and manufacturing, and I wrote this book. It was a very good idea to write this book, actually, for reasons that any person like yourself would easily understand. And so I knew how ones and zeros go across the wire to make your computer work. And I'm like, genetics and information technology is practically the same thing. It's digital code. It's ones and zeros. Now, DNA has 4 ones and zeros. It's called ACGT, and internet has 2, but they're functionally they're equivalent. Oh, well, you know what? Right off the bat, that settles one question. So Brian had said to me, he'd actually stated this quite well. He stated the traditional position eloquently. He said, Perry, listen, let's say you got 100 million falcons for 10 million years, and they're flying around. Well, once in a while, one of them is going to have an accidental copying error in its DNA, and once in a while, a copying error will be better, and then the better ones outhunt the inferior ones, and it just gets better and better. That's wrong. That is absolutely wrong. And you know why? Because data never gets better with copying errors. Data is incredibly fragile. And one of the things in an industrial Ethernet book is the fact that there are these very, very, very elaborate systems for making so you and I, we're on Zoom, and you can see my video and I can see yours, and there's this ton of data going back and forth. What you never think about is if there's static interference on the Wi-Fi, or if there's a thunderstorm somewhere, or anything like that, if any of that data gets corrupted, there are programs that detect that the data has been corrupted. There's all these checking mechanisms that go, okay, did that come correctly? Does this compare to this right? They'll resend the data if it's corrupt. And like you can completely break a software program by messing up one word or one byte. Okay, it's incredibly fragile. And the fact that you can go down the expressway and watch a YouTube video on your iPad is a bloody miracle. Okay, and there's no way that every now and then a copying error is going to make a bird see better. Ever. Never, ever, ever. I've had this argument with biologists. Most of them think it can. No. You know what I found out? What I found out, and it took a while. Like, it took a while to dig down and verify all this. Cells have all the same stuff that Ethernet routers have. Error correction, error detection, mechanism, checksums, ways of making sure, okay, this cell got copied correctly. If they don't get copied correctly, they go down the dumpster. Like there's a red lever, like it's called apoptosis. It's kill the cell because it's not forming correctly. And okay, but that's just the appetizer. The main course, it took me 2 years to find. So remember what I said about like holding things in tension? Mm-hmm. Now, if I was, most people with my background and my education would take what I just told you and they go, oh, creationism. There you go. Evolution can't possibly be true. I said, you know what? I think everything about the engineering stuff is true, but I still think evolution might be true for a whole bunch of other reasons we could talk about later, maybe if you want. 2 years later, I found out about an experiment in 1944. And a woman named Barbara McClintock, she was kind of like a hacker, and she damaged the DNA of her corn plants to see what would happen. And the corn plant repaired its DNA by copying parts from other chromosomes and piecing together missing digital code so that it would reproduce properly. And it reproduced, and she figured out exactly what it did with very crude microscopes, and she still did it. Okay, it was actually astonishing that she figured all this out, because they didn't even know what DNA was then. She's looking at chromosomes under a microscope, and they don't even know that this is deoxyribonucleic acid, but she figured out, okay, this moved over to here, this moved over to here. I'm looking at the corn kernels that came out of this plant. I can figure out what happened to all these genes. It was unbelievable what she did. And so let me just clarify, the plant reprogrammed its own genetics. Okay, this is like, you ever see the MC Escher drawing where a hand is drawing a hand?
Yep.
It's like that.
That's creepy. That is, it's creepy. And I mean, just, what's the term? I mean, I've never heard of that. I had no idea. I did not have the slightest idea. So
99% of people have never heard a word of this. And Jerry, this is how evolution works. It's not random. It's not accidental. It's not billiard balls banging around in the universe. Any engineer, look, this is called communication theory and information theory. That's like all the stuff behind a book like this, okay? Information theory says it is flat out impossible for copying errors to ever get finch beaks to be more fit for an environment, much less give you an arm or a leg or an eye. It's absurd. It's absurd in the extreme. And if you go to Barnes and Noble and you buy a Richard Dawkins book about evolution or a Jerry Coyne book, like the famous evolution authors who are all atheists, by the way they tell you evolution works is flat out wrong. Like at a 150,000 foot level, they're sort of right, but in the details, they're completely wrong. And they are not telling you this, okay? And then the creationists aren't telling you this either. Why? Because they think it's a hoax. And this is like any political debate where it's dominated by the extreme zealots. Well, the sane people have been completely drowned out for 80 years. But
those
all
people
of this
in the middle, those people in the middle who've taken the extremes and sort of blended them.
Right.
You know, it's interesting to me that I've had this conversation many times with my best friend Tom about the extremes, right? Here in Oregon, we're famous for the extremes. We've got some situation going on right now at the state capitol. It's kind of humorous. We've got log trucks and, we've got blue collar guys at the state capitol protesting. which
Yeah.
by the way, it's a different coverage by the news media when the politics are there, as opposed to the granola tree hugging, stinky, smelly, whatever. I'm saying, if you're a stinky, smelly granola hugger, tree hugger, whatever, come on, just take it as a joke. But it's just, and so you've got these two extremes. And my friend and I, Tom, I mean, he and I always say, the extremes always have it wrong. It doesn't matter what the conversation is. It almost doesn't matter. The extremes always have it wrong, and it's always somewhere in the middle, which has been the beauty of our system of government for all these years. And now we've got the extremes ruling or they're pulling at each other. The answer is always in the middle. So it's not shocking to me that in this particular case, this argument for, is it evolution, is it creationism, it's in the middle. It's a little bit of both. So I'm anxious to hear what this looks like.
Well, so Jerry, I discovered that fundamentalism is not a religion, it's a personality type. and those are the ones that cluster on the far edges, okay? The far left, the far right, they pick this one thing, and it's God, right? Like whatever it is, like, it could be abolish the tax code or like whatever their thing is, right? Yeah. But like this is our savior, this is it, right? And so and Jerry, there is decades of rich literature about this. And once I kind of got onto it and figured out like which authors and which scientists are really on the track, it was like, oh my word. Because when I had that argument with Brian, I was like, well, do the engineers know something the biologists don't know? Or do the biologists know something the engineers don't know? The answer turned out to be the plants and the animals and the cells know something that neither the engineers nor the biologists understand. And living things are astonishingly more sophisticated than anybody gives them credit for. And what's interesting is, I've got a technology prize, which we'll talk about in a second. But when I went out and got backers for the prize, because I had to go raise money, right, just like anybody, to get this prize going. There was two kinds of people that quickly and easily understood what I was doing. The first person that said yes was in dentistry. Okay.
I did not know that. That's cool.
The first person, it was a person in the dentistry business, as a wealthy cosmetic surgeon, and most of my backers are either in some kind of software or engineering or medicine. Now, there is a very interesting little term. It's called the Salem hypothesis, and it is a guy named Salem who figured out that doctors, dentists, engineers, and programmers statistically are skeptical of standard Darwinian evolution explanation. Now, why is that? Because if you're a doctor or a dentist or an engineer or a programmer, nothing good ever happens by accident. Right? And so, then I come to find out, well, bacteria, a spoonful of bacteria can do more programming in 12 minutes than a team of Microsoft engineers can do in 12 weeks. And when you go to the doctor with an infection and he prescribes antibiotics, which happened to me 2 weeks ago, and he goes, finish the bottle all the way down, because if you don't kill those bugs, they turn into superbugs. Yeah, they'll turn into superbugs in 20 minutes. They evolve fast. And so now, why is this important? Well, first of all, if anything, that I'm an engineer and I look at the hand at into my arm and I'm impressed, and this does not look random or accidental, that went like exponentially squared. It was like, this is seriously not random and accidental. In fact, what's really going on here is light years. I think one blade of grass is 10,000 years ahead of any technology. I mean that.
I'm not surprised that you say that. I'm really not. I mean, I live in an area, and I talk about where I live all the time. I'm out in the vineyards and oak groves, rolling hills. I'm in between the Cascade Mountain Range and the Coast Mountain Range here in Oregon, right in the valley. Beautiful area. Yeah. And I look at every morning I go for a walk. I look at these amazing trees, and you look at one blade on a Douglas fir evergreen tree, one blade of their leaf, right? And you think, if you were to pull that tree apart, every leaf, every little tiny leaf that are an inch long off that tree, they're all the same. And if you think about what a tree's DNA is instructing the tree to do, it's perfect replication, right? And not only that, the seeds that come off of it from the pine cones are all programmed. That program, and when we think microprocessors or something like this this iWatch I've got, right? We think this is such amazing technology because I can make a phone call with it, and I can check my I can use it as an ECG.
Yeah.
But think about the technology in a little tiny seed from a Doug fir tree that turns into a forest. So I'm not surprised you say that. I mean, we are, I think, just on the cusp of where nature is as far as technology, it's technology, if you want to call it.
Absolutely. In fact, I believe that every problem Silicon Valley is trying to solve is already solved in the cell. And for people to tell you that it's all random, accidental, purposeless, it's a crime against humanity. That is so utterly false and misleading, it's not even funny. And so a little more of the story. So one of the things I realized was, okay, so DNA is a code. And okay, so what about all the other codes? Well, we got English and Chinese and HTML and PHP and JavaScript and, et cetera, et cetera. Well, gee, there's a million codes and 999,999 are designed. And there's one, and we don't know where it came from. So it might seem to suggest that there's some kind of a design going on. Well, so about a year after I got into all this, I had a friend at the biggest church in Chicago, Willow Creek, and he invited me to come and give a talk. So I came and I gave a talk called, "If You Can Read This, I Can Prove God Exists," which is a little tongue-in-cheek because you can't really prove that God exists, but hey, I got a pretty solid argument here. A million codes and only one, we don't know where it came from. And so I gave this talk, and then I put a recording on my website, and it went viral. And now all of a sudden, I was making all these atheists really angry at me. This became an experiment. It was a marketing experiment as much as anything. It was like, how fast can I back these guys into a corner? Can I do it in a day? Can I do it in an hour? Can I do it in 15 minutes? Can I do it in 5 minutes? Can I do it in a paragraph? So I'm like, how do I explain this? It was like a serious endeavor because this is not a very easy subject to explain to people. And so I backed this guy into a corner, and then all of a sudden he posted a link to that talk on the world's largest atheist website in their discussion board. So the largest atheist discussion board in the world. It was called Infidels. And he goes, "Hey, I've been talking to this Perry Marshall guy. Be nice to him while you rip him to shreds." And I go, "Oh no. Oh no. Oh no. I do not want to do this." And my friend John goes, "Well, Perry, God's got a sense of humor. I think you're going to be doing this. I think you were asking for it. You just didn't know." Okay, here we go. And so just to give you a little context. All right, so this is 2005. So what else is going on in my life? So what's happened? I've had I've had a business. I've hung out a shingle 4 years ago. For 2 years, I've been like the king of Google AdWords. Everybody loves Perry. I'm going to seminars and I'm speaking at conferences and I'm on teleseminars and like the whole circuit, inside and out. Everybody likes Perry. And then over here, there's this smoldering fire and they hate Perry. Oh, they hate this guy. And there's a lot of them. And like pretty soon, like within a few months, you type in Perry Marshall idiot, hundreds of websites, they're all talking about me and they're all hating me. And I'm defending myself in this forum. And if I make one slip, they will eviscerate me like a pack of Wolverines. They are mad. Oh, they are mad. Well, you know what happened? This went on for 7 years and they never poked a hole in my argument. I said, show me a code that's not designed. All you need is one. Come on. Fess up. Come on, guys. Show me one. Well,
the fundamentals.
I'm moving really fast here, but it would go round and round in circles. And one day I had this like, Perry, tell them, you have to tell them exactly how to prove you wrong. Okay. So I wrote a specification. I said, if you want to prove that you got a code and you didn't cheat, you didn't design a code, but you got like, maybe you poured chemicals in your bathtub and you got them to self-organize into digital communication. Here's how you prove that you did it. And I wrote this all out. I basically stole most of it right out of an engineering communication textbook. And I said, here you go. And I said to a guy, show me a code that's not designed. Here's how you do it. If you can, I'll write you a check for $10,000. And then I waited to see what would happen. And you know what happened?
Crickets.
It shut everybody up. It was like, woo! It was like a flat line on a heart monitor. Nothing.
That hits close to home.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Wow. That was Freudian or something.
Oh, that's hilarious. No, don't worry.
Okay. So I eventually wrote a book, Evolution 2.0, and I said, well, I really want this to be a $10 million prize. Well, so what happened? So the book came out, and when the book came out, it was 3 million, and then I got it to 5, and I got invited to Arizona State University to talk about my $5 million prize, and I started getting traction with scientists. I got the leading geneticist at Harvard Medical School on my judging panel. George Church, he's a legend in genetics. Everybody in genetics knows who George Church is. He's a rock star. He's on my judging panel. I got the leading physiologist at Oxford on my judging panel. By the way, that guy, his name is Dennis Noble, and what he's famous for, he's a physiologist who figured out the cardiac rhythm, which made pacemakers possible.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's my guy right there.
And he has the Commander of the British Empire Medal from Queen Elizabeth, and he's a fellow of the Royal Society, and he's a rock star in physiology. And by the way, you'll be very interested to know this, Jerry. Run-of-the-mill, rank and file, average scientists wouldn't touch this thing with a 10-foot pole. It was too controversial. I'm pissing off too many people. Mm-hmm. And scientists are in a very fragile ecosystem. They got to publish papers. They got to get grants. If they piss somebody off, their career can be over.
You're blackballed fast.
The only guys I could get, and I found this out the hard way. I didn't know this in advance. The only guys I could get were the rock stars.
Interesting.
Who were untouchable. I told George Church, I said, George, if you don't like controversy, don't do this. And he goes, Perry, I am trying to create Jurassic Park at Harvard. Everything I do is controversial. Don't worry about it. It's okay. That was a great conversation.
The guy you need, though. That's the guy you need.
Yeah, right. Mavericks. And what I found, Jerry, is that the very highest people in academia are entrepreneurial like us. They're curious. You can have fascinating conversations with them. And so I got my prize up to 5 million. And literally, when was this? This was 5 weeks ago. It was May 11. I get an email out of the blue. This guy says, "Hi, my name is Paul Flather. I'm president of the Philosophy Forum at the London School of Economics, and I'm an Oxford professor. And I got your friend Dennis Noble, also from Oxford, and we would like to have you help us do a media event at the Royal Society and talk about your prize." I'm like, what? Like the same Royal Society with Isaac Newton, Charles Darwin, Stephen Hawking, all those guys. Yeah, that Royal Society. And so I was rather excited about this, and I went back to all these people that had turned me down for backing the prize, and we raised it to $10 million. And I went to London, and we held a press conference at the Royal Society, and the Financial Times wrote it up 2 days later, and it's going to be a video of the entire thing is going to be on voicesfromoxford.com or .org any day now. And so Jerry, you kind of asked if there was a formula, and here's the closest I can give you to a formula. So I'm going to tell you a crazy story. So do you happen to remember the Beowulf story from English literature from high school or college?
It's so very faint. I mean, I remember getting through that massive tome of a book. My 10th grade AP teacher, Linda Althauser, she's a great lady. Bless her. Bless her.
So this is actually what the Beowulf story is. The Beowulf story is the formula. Okay, so let me tell you the story.
Okay.
So there's a king. His name is Hrothgar, and he's got a mead hall. You know, mead is like alcohol made from honey. Mm-hmm. His men like to come and get drunk in his mead hall, and it's all great, and the kingdom is all great, except for one problem. Is there's this monster named Grendel who likes to kick down the door and kill everybody, and it's demoralizing the kingdom, shall we say. So he sends out an RFQ. Request for quotes. Who can help us kill a monster? Beowulf is a consultant.
Got it.
And Beowulf comes along and he goes, "Oh, I got your RFQ. So, I swam in the sea for 14 days and I slayed this dragon and I did this and I did that. I can kill Grendel. I am 30 times stronger than a normal man." And so Beowulf goes to sleep in the mead hall and waits for Grendel to show up. And sure enough, Grendel shows up and he kills a couple of guys. And then Beowulf tries to kill him with his sword, and the sword doesn't work. So he rips Grendel's arm off, and Grendel goes bleeding off and falls into the swamp and disappears. And everybody's like, "Yay, you killed Grendel! Woo!" And everything's great until Grendel's mother shows up.
I don't remember this part.
This is the best part.
This is starting to sound like the Goldbergs.
Listen, if you Beowulf is awesome on audiobook, and if you listen to it, you go, "Oh, this is where Lord of the Rings came from."
Sure. It's
the oldest thing in anything resembling English. It's 1,300 years old, and it's a great story. Like go on Audible, buy it. After about 10 minutes, you'll get used to the poetic. It's a poem. Okay, it's great. Okay, so here comes Grendel's mother, and she is mad, and she kills more people, and then she goes stomping into the swamp. Now, there's a lesson here already, which is if you kill a problem, but you don't kill what gave birth to the problem, you still have a problem. Okay? Like, this is life, man. All right. So what the poem says about the swamp, it says that a deer, this swamp is so awful. It is so dreadful. It's so poisonous. It has so many evil spirits in it that a deer being chased by wolves would rather be eaten than dive into the swamp. But this is the swamp that Beowulf must dive into. So he goes and he dives in, and it takes him like, they never explain about oxygen. I don't know how that part works, but he goes and he goes deep, 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 and he gets to the bottom, and he finds Beowulf's mother, and he starts wrestling with her, and he tries to kill her, and he finds out his sword doesn't work. She has magic that his sword can't overcome. And she's almost about to kill him, and he sees this other sword that was created by these ancient creatures, and he runs over and he gets his sword, and that sword kills her. Okay, and now the monster is dead, and he drags Grendel's head to the surface, and now he becomes like, gets the king's daughter, and yay, and it's all, and that's the story. All right, now there's two things about the story that are very, very much formula for anything. Okay, so the first one is, if you kill the problem but you don't kill the mother of the problem, you still have a problem. That's the first thing. The second thing is, the monster lives in a swamp that nobody wants to go into. Okay, the worst problems in the world are problems that most people want to pretend don't even exist. Right? It's like the elephant in the room.
Right.
Okay? Like, I don't want to talk about that. You don't discuss that in polite company. Oh, let's fix a different problem. Let's fix an easier problem, right? So, you have to like plug your nose and go down, and you have to go until you get to the bottom of the swamp. And you're not solving anything until you get to the bottom of the swamp. And then when you get to the bottom of the swamp, you find out the rules down there are different than the rules up on dry land. And your weapons don't work. And the weapon that you're going to find is the one that you find at the bottom of the swamp. It's not, you're not carrying it with you. You need new weapons. And then if you can figure that all out, then you kill the root of the problem. Well, one of my friends mentioned this Beowulf story to me a couple of years ago, and actually I went and I listened to it, and I'm like, oh my word, this is like this is a metaphor for like every major thing that I've ever solved in my whole life. Like when I got drug into the atheist forum, that was the swamp. Like, I really, really, really didn't want to be there, right? And then what's the weapon? The weapon turned out to be putting money on the table and saying, okay, stop arguing about philosophy, stop arguing about religion, stop arguing about ideology, solve a scientific problem and get the money. But you know what? There's two things you don't get to do. So this is going to piss off both sides, okay? You don't get to say, well, God did it. That settles it. Let's go out to lunch. Okay, there's no scientist who can make a living writing that in a scientific paper. And believe me, I still believe in God more than ever. But that's an ultimate answer. You don't know how many layers there are between where we're at and the ultimate. Okay? Scientists have to peel the onion. Okay? And I've got a prize out there for $10 million. Peel the onion, figure this out. and we'll write you a check. Okay. But here's the other thing you don't get to do. You don't get to make up a story about a warm pond and a lucky lightning strike and a happy chemical accident. And, well, you know, some billiard balls just banged around in the universe and eventually a cell popped out somewhere. No, that is not science. Okay. That is mythology. And we're going to call a spade a spade. And so what's happened, Jerry, is that both extremes do not like me. The creationists don't like me. The intelligent design guys are like, right? The atheists hate me. But you know what? You know who likes me? Is guys at Oxford and Harvard that are really trying to solve the problems. And that's why I got invited to the Royal Society. So it's like a yin and yang on one hand. Mm-hmm. Electrical engineer from Dan Kennedy world, from the University of Nebraska, who writes advertising books, doesn't get invited to the Royal Society, right? Okay, that would be the yin. Yeah. But what's the yang? I put together the biggest origin of life prize in history. I precisely defined one of the most difficult problems in all of science, and I put $10 million up by raising money, which is what entrepreneurs have to do. I took my engineering skills, my philosophical sensibilities, my entrepreneurial skills, I put it all together in a stir fry, and I said, I am going to focus all of this, everything I have, on this one problem, and I'm going to jackhammer on this problem until we get to some kind of an answer. And I know this is important. I know this is worthwhile. So I don't care how many scientists I have to talk to. I'm going to get this done. And that's as close to a Beowulf and persistence.
Your analogy of Beowulf is spot on. And interestingly enough, that Beowulf story works on every problem we have.
Yes, it does.
Our internal garbage. Ray Dalio's book Principles is all about the Beowulf story, getting to the truth, getting to the bottom of the swamp.
Yes.
And it's ugly, it's messy, nobody likes it, and that's why nobody ever goes there, and that's why nobody ever reaches their potential, really. I mean, yes. We don't reach potential because we don't want to be at the bottom of the swamp.
Yes.
Fascinating.
Yes. And what will happen if you go to the bottom of the swamp is at some point, I can't tell you when, at some point you'll go, I'm actually kind of comfortable down here. Okay, okay, I figured this out. If I wear this kind of suit and this kind of helmet, and this kind of oxygen tank, I'm fine, right? And now all of a sudden, I'm super competent in the bottom of the swamp. And then what happens, you end up discovering some treasure. Okay, I could have never possibly imagined that I was going to discover Barbara McClintock and all this natural genetic engineering and all this stuff that cells do. It has substantially informed my work as a business consultant. In my opinion, business is biology and biology is business. There is no difference. Business is how 8 billion biological organisms called human beings feed themselves on planet Earth. Okay? And all the same principles apply. Variation, creativity, selection, competition, hybridization, symbiotic relationships, cooperation, ecosystems, food chains, it's all the same. In fact, Jerry, you probably understand evolution, biology, and ecosystems better than you ever assumed that you did, because everything you know from business transfers over. You walk in the woods, and you're like, well, all right, I got grass growing there, but there's a flower growing there, and there's a tree growing there, and the moss grows on the tree, and you can formulate a business analogy for every bit of it.
Yeah.
I got parasites and yeah.
There's another, I want to show something here for those folks watching this on video. And you'll notice I didn't dress up today, and that's the way it rolls today. So if you're watching this on video, I've got this old book. It was published in 1927. The contents, by the way, are probably from the early tens and teens of 1900. inside this book is a full-blown discussion and a recipe, if you will, for what is brand new today. And the reason why I bring this up is your discovery department of McClintock's information. So what I've got here is a book written by Percy Howe. It's called Percy Howe's Letters. And Percy Howe actually was one of the pioneers in silver diamine fluoride, SDF, which SDF is used today. It's become a very trendy thing to use on young children and adolescents to treat cavities, because silver diamine fluoride arrests the process. It turns black when it contacts the tooth and oxygen and whatever. I don't know all the specifics to the reaction, but the bottom line is there's nothing new on planet Earth, Perry. There's nothing. And so if you want to solve this problem, you don't go to Silicon Valley, you go back to nature where, and so all this stuff just ties together. I'm laughing because I had this brilliant conversation with another gentleman, Dr. Roger Levin. And, before that conversation, I shared with Roger these other books I have from the early 1900s, 1905, 1910, and they're all about dental practice management. And when you read those books, all you need to do is just update the lingo, and you've got every modern day practice management ever written. So, your quest to go back in time to find the answers. The answer, by the way, is already there. We just haven't peeled the onion back far enough to see. Oh, right there! Look at that. It's been spelled out for us. So, I applaud you for the work and the process and the dogged determination of. This to me is the biggest. In the last few minutes maybe we have together, I would love to have you maybe explain, because the first conversation you and I had on this back in October or whatever it was, 6, 7, 8 months ago, the enormity of what happens when this prize is actually awarded.
Oh yeah.
Would you just maybe give us a few little, because up until now you're like, wow, this is really interesting, but what the hell does it all mean? And I think what it means maybe will really tie this together for our listeners today.
Yes. Okay. I'm really glad you asked that. So Siri understands everything you say and has no idea what you mean. Your dog understands nothing that you say and does understand what you mean.
That's
okay.
So true.
Okay. Like you watch a 6-year-old talk to Alexa or Siri, right? And it's really all you got to do is say something that's not in the program and it's in the weeds, right?
I don't know what you mean.
but your dog, you look at him, you go, Fido, don't you eat my steak. And he's this is the key. Fido is going to decide, does he want to eat your steak or not eat your steak? Okay, Siri doesn't decide. Siri is programmed. Siri is just it's like a set of mechanical gears. Life is not a set of mechanical gears. Life has volition. Life has free will. Life has agency. There is something inside us that decides. Jerry says, Perry, lift up your arm. And I go, okay. Or I go, no, I'm not going to lift up my arm. I get to decide. All of human nature is about deciding, right? You train dogs to do certain things. Okay. The ability to assign meaning to language is the most rudimentary element of choice in deciding. Okay. Is it a 1 or a 0? 1 means Jerry, 0 means Perry. No, how about 1 means Perry, 0 means Jerry? You assign meaning, or we could have an acronym, PJC, Perry and Jerry's conversation. And then from now on, every time we type PJC, you and I know what that means, right? We created language. Okay. Now, the ability to do that is how you get any code. I've never seen any other way to get a code. So I don't think this is just a search for the genetic code, just a search for origin of life. This is a search for where does the spark that makes life happen come from? What is it? What does it consist of? How do you create it? Richard Feynman, famous scientist, said, I do not understand what I cannot build. The gold standard of understanding something is being able to build it. Engineering. The gold standard of biology is engineering. And let's not forget, we're in a world of genetic engineering, and we can edit genes as easy as blog posts now. So this is really getting important. What makes life tick? What is the thing? How do you get from chemicals to code? How do you get just from laws of physics, which is rocks and, you know, and rain and stuff, to biology, which heals itself and feeds itself and takes care of itself and builds ecosystems? And right, there's this thing that creates order out of chaos instead of just turning order into chaos. Nobody knows what it is. This prize is about that question, and it's completely clearly defined, but I think it's one of the deepest questions in science and philosophy and religion and anywhere. And maybe as a cherry on the sundae, this is what all of the AI lacks.
And that's and you know, Perry, there's a good chance we'll never know.
There's a good chance, and who knows?
And so maybe we're not supposed to know, because if that is in fact revealed, is that the end?
Well, I don't know.
Or is it the beginning? I mean,
well,
who knows?
Okay, so let's talk about that for a second. So some guy in 1996 wrote a fiction novel describing airplanes taking out the Twin Towers, and then 5 years later it actually happened, right? I think whatever happens in this experiment, this question, this prize, whatever happens, however it plays out, some science fiction author will have already anticipated it. Now, you could say, well, good grief, Perry, why would you want to pry open that big of a Pandora's box? Are you really sure you want to do that? And my answer is, well, it's better I do it than Monsanto gets it first.
Yep.
And look, I'm very serious about that. Now, if people know me or pay attention to me, I've got a reputation as a very honest, high integrity person. I'm very respected in the industry as a truth teller. You want a truth teller to figure this out. And the problem with most truth tellers is they're not daring enough to tackle these things. And then only the people with narcissistic personality disorder seem to be doing it. And that's not good. And I'm sick and tired of Christians bringing up the rear. You know, 500 years ago, they were leading the charge in the Renaissance and everything. And now it's like, they're like 25 years behind everybody else. And I just think that's wrong. And I think that the practice of science is an act of worship. Isaac Newton would have told you that. Copernicus would have told you that. Galileo would have told you that. Einstein would have sort of told you that. And like, if we can know, we should figure it out. And their opinions are all over the map. George Church thinks we'll solve this in 5 years. I think there's a 10% chance of solving it in my lifetime. I know some people think we may never solve it. Whatever it is, it is. Maybe 500 years from now, it's like in the books is like one of these ancient problems that nobody can solve, or maybe we'll solve it. But we got to run through the iterations and the options. Like, okay, so, and we got to think about it before it gets here. So here we are.
Yeah. And
I'm glad you're asking, because we need to ask.
Yeah. Well, you know, what's the higher purpose of intelligent life? To me, that's a very valid question. What's the point? Really, what's the point?
Yeah.
You know, aside from I want money, I want sex, I want drugs, I want rock and roll. What is the point? I mean, there's got to be some point. And I think this question helps us answer that question. I mean, it just opens. Some probably think, hey, it opens a Pandora's box. I think, you know, I don't know if that's the case or not. And I don't think anybody really can answer that. but I think it's a question we've got to be asking. And I think one of the things that sold me on the conversation with you back in October was simply that better you than Monsanto.
Yeah.
Really? Seriously.
Yeah.
If this technology, this knowledge does not fall into the public domain, I think there's a far greater chance of evil coming from it than good. I mean, if you want to play the good and evil thing.
Yeah. Well, I agree. And, I've been watching Google very closely for the last 17 years, and they've gone from innocent and idealistic to downright evil. And they treat their advertisers like a boyfriend throwing his girlfriend down the stairs. Well, if you don't like that, then people with integrity need to not shy away from wielding power, because otherwise the narcissists will take over. So, you got to do the best you can.
Yep. Well, Perry, we're out of time. I know you and I could continue to talk because it's fascinating, and where this leads is probably another easy an hour conversation just on the highlights on where it leads. I want to make sure if folks want to learn more about not just Perry Marshall, which I think you should. If you're not familiar with Perry, go to perrymarshall.com and just get on your email list at the very least. Best case, get to one of your events, hire you, whatever. I mean, get to know who Perry Marshall is. Where do they go to find out about Evolution 2.0?
Go to evo2.org, evo2.org. I have a Evolution 2.0 podcast. I interview very interesting people on all kinds of topics, including scientists. You can get 3 free chapters of Evolution 2.0. There's a link to the book. You can buy it on Amazon, Evolution 2.0. It's about $15 paperback. There's a bunch of videos, and get on the email list and the podcast, and I think you'll get what you're looking for. This is a very deep rabbit hole and is very fascinating, and you will find that it informs other areas of your life in unexpected ways, because Jerry, it's what you said. It's like there is nothing new under the sun. It's just recognizing new ways of contextualizing the existing things, right? And that's a great relief, because that means you don't really have to invent anything. You only have to recontextualize what already exists, and that's a great relief.
I've been practicing yoga for the last at least the last 2 months, maybe almost 2.5 months since my pacemaker implant. I decided that I needed to do something for the mind. Because I was having some issues understanding, okay, this thing's keeping me alive. What the hell does that mean? And it was hard to wrap my head around it. So I thought, well, I'm going to investigate this yoga thing, which has opened up a whole nother can of worms for me, and it's fascinating. But what I think it is the answers are around us. It's our awareness level changes based on our context. And that awareness brings about knowledge that's been sitting there that we had no idea was there, and we had no idea what to do with it. And so I think this is part of that process. When you say, hey, this helps in other areas of your life, it brings out about awareness. And I think that's really why I wanted you on here. It's an awareness issue. People got to know what's going on. And I think just get the book, get Perry's book. It's cool. I mean, it's cool stuff. It's fun to talk about. It's entertaining, but it's also really deep things that, if you're interested in how the human race is going to perform and what's going to happen over the next 10, 15, 20, 30, 50, 100 years, I think you should be interested in this. So
you should.
Selfishly,
I agree. Well,
Perry,
Jerry, thank you
for your time. Always fun, always entertaining, always interesting. We'll have you back on the podcast for sure. And thank you very much.
Right on. Thank you, Jerry. Appreciate it. It's an honor to be here. Take care.
Good luck. And thanks everybody for joining us on the Jerry Jones Direct Radio Show. We'll catch you next time. Thank you.